Picture this. You finally get to the river with a monster hand, and then you freeze. Do you bet small, overbet, take your pants off and roll around on the table? Most players guess here, and that's why they never level up. The river is where most of the money is made in poker, and crushers aren't guessing. I'll show you one simple question, a question so powerful, it may even completely flip how you think about poker. Get this question right, and you'll know exactly when to bomb for value or when to go huge for a bluff, and hint, your bluffs and value will almost never be the same size. And when you face a big river bet, I'll walk you through a checklist that shows you exactly when to call, when to fold, and even when to turn your bluff catcher into a bluff and the exact sizing to use, so you're never stuck guessing again. This is the same system we've built from 50,000 hours of live data, and it's the one our top students are using to earn $100 an hour and beyond. And just to be clear, on this channel, we don't make any income claims or guarantees. If you think you're going to make $100+ an hour in poker just from watching a YouTube video, you might be delusional. No, what we do is just pass down the exact lessons our top performers are using to crush games right now. If you've ever been stuck on the river with no plan, this is the video that fixes it. All right, so first let's talk about when we are betting on the river, whether we've got value, we've got a bluff, when we're trying to decide on what size to use, what size is the most efficient. The question that I like to ask is called the inverse question. And the inverse question, we simply ask, if we have a value hand, we simply ask, what size would I bet if I had a bluff here and I was trying to get them to fold? And if we have a bluff, we simply ask, well, if I had a value hand, what size would I bet if I was trying to get them to call? And I'm gonna show you a bunch of examples of this. And the inverse question, what this does very, very effectively, this allows us to distance ourselves from our exact hand and come up with the perfect sizing to use on the river, both when we have value and when we have a bluff. So let's jump in and I will show you a plethora of examples. All right, so first we're gonna talk about a situation where we may wanna go small with our value hands and big with our bluffs. And hint, hint, our value and bluffs are almost never going to be the same size on rivers because the players we're playing against are going to be exploitable. So let me show you. This hand, we are playing 2-5, 1K effective. We're gonna open ace king of clubs on the button. Villain's going to call in the big blind. We flop the nut flush draw. And as you guys know, on flops, I like to choose a size where they're gonna raise their strong stuff, call with their weak stuff. Some boards that's possible, some boards it's not, but we're not gonna spend a whole lot of time on flops and turns in this video. We're going to try to move along quickly and jump into these rivers. So on the turn here, brings in the flush, and when a nut changing turn card comes in, I like to bet small with both my value and my bluffs. With my value, because if I go small here, I keep in the hands we're drawing dead here. Hands like pocket eights with a club. We would love for that hand to call. And also when we go small here with our value, well, if they have a flush, we're gonna give them a much higher percentage chance that they're gonna fast play their flush. Same rationale when we have bluffs here, but I wanna stay focused on rivers. So let's go to the river. Our opponent calls. The river is a 7, and when our opponent checks it over, what is our opponent's range? Before we even get into that almighty inverse question. So our opponent's range getting to this river in general is going to be pretty weak, because on the flop, if our opponent had a strong hand like 2-pair or a set on a wet dynamic board, when we bet small, they would raise. On the turn, when we choose a small size, if our opponent has a flush that is vulnerable, maybe a 7 high flush, an 8 high flush, something like that, a lot of the times they are going to raise also. They don't want to see a 4 flush come out. They don't want to lose value, right? They've waited all day to make their flushing hand. So what is our opponent's range going to be getting to this river? Well, it's going to be a lot of weak hands, pocket 8s, pocket 9s, hands like 10x, right? So how this inverse question works, we have value in the spot. What we want to do with the inverse question is simply ask, if I had a bluff here, what size would I bet to get my opponent to fold? And we have to bring back their range in the spots. Let's consider our opponent has the top or the middle of their range, right? Let's consider they have a hand like ace 10, king 10, queen 10. If we're trying to get 10x to fold in a spot, what size would we have to go? Maybe a small overbet would get the job done. So that's the size to get 10x to fold. When we have ace king of clubs, obviously we don't want 10x to fold. We want to get that hand to call. And just because we have the nuts doesn't mean we can just go huge here and just pray and hope for the best. We have to take into account our opponent's range. If we were bluffing, we'd probably just go like 200, 250, but we have to go smaller than that if we want 10x to call. Small is a relative concept. This pot is not all that big. It's less than $200 in a 2-5 game. So a small bet here to get a hand like king 10, queen 10 to call, something like that, maybe 150, 3/4 pot, right? Something like that on this river to try to get called. All right, so let's say same spot, except we have jack 9 of diamonds. Once again, on the flop, gonna choose a size where they raise the strong stuff, call it the weak stuff, just about half pot. So our opponent calls, we go to the turn. So when they just call on the turn, when we choose a small size, that drags our opponent to the river with a weak and wide range, which is going to make our bluff much more profitable. That's why we want to go small on these turns with our bluffs. But let's stick to rivers. We know our opponent's range. It's going to be a lot of 10x, pocket 9s, pocket 8s, 6x, stuff like that. So on this river, we have a bluff. We just have jack high. What would we do in this spot if we had value and wanted to get called? Well, if we were trying to get called by 10x, we'd probably choose a size like 150, 160. So therefore, we need to go a little bigger than that to make sure 10x folds. Maybe 220, 250, 280, 285, something like that. I always like to add a little sauce on top just to make sure our opponents will fold. Now, a little caveat here, if our opponents do slow play more, if they do trap, if they do have more of the nuts in their range, we need to be careful with this size because we can run into brick walls. If we know our opponents, they're a little more fearful and they're going to fast play all of their flushes on the turn, they're going to fast play all of their sets on the flop, then we can just add a little gravy on top of this bet size, go a little bit bigger because we're just not running into a brick wall all that often, and we want to be certain a hand like king 10, ace 10, something like that folds. So these are a couple examples of when we want to go smaller with our value and much bigger with our bluffs. And I can already hear it. I can hear the cascade of comments.
Well, Mark, if we just go big with our bluffs all the time, aren't players going to exploit us?
No! And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about these videos. Like,
Mark, you're just going big with your bluffs all the time and small with it.
We are not. I'm going to show you a few concrete examples now of when we may want to go very big with our value and quite small with our bluffs. All right, so in this one, we've got pocket kigglies. The cutoff is going to open. We're going to 3-bet on the button. They are going to call heads up to a flop. We are going to choose a small size. Notice in these 3-bet pots, I go just a little bit smaller because the absolute size of the pot is bigger. And so these 3-bet pots, I am sizing down. 4-bet pots, I would size down even further. Let's go along to the turn here. And on this turn, we spike the nuts. Our opponent checks it over. And in this situation, when I'm determining sizing on turns, I like to ask first, is our opponent capped or are they uncapped? Well, this could go either way. If you're against somebody who fast plays all the time, somebody who would fast play pocket 4s or pocket 9s or deuces on this flop, then in this spot, our opponent is more capped. If you're against a player who's a little more tricky, a little more trappy, especially in 3-bet pots, well, that type of opponent could still have 4s, deuces, 9s, certainly. So this is going to be player dependent, and you're going to have to ask the right questions to come to the right decision. Let's just assume in this example, our opponent does fast play all their good hands on the flop. And if our opponent is capped getting to this turn, are they elastic or are they inelastic? Elastic simply means they're going to be price sensitive. Inelastic means they don't care whether you bet huge or huger. Huger, that's a word, huger. They're going to call no matter what. So I would say on this turn, if our opponent is capped, they're probably going to be pretty elastic. So we go 80 on the turn, our opponent calls, we get to the river, which is an ace. And when our opponent checks it over, I like to ask, what is our opponent's range? And in this situation, I believe our opponent's range is kind of in two distinct buckets: very strong hands and very weak hands. So what are these strong hands that our opponent could have on this river? Well, they could certainly have a hand like ace 9 suited. We chose a small size on the turn to allow them to call with hands like 9x, right? They could have ace 9 suited. They could have ace 4, ace deuce suited. They could have quite a bit of 2-pair. They could even have the last king in their hand and have a hand like king 9 of diamonds, or they could even have a hand like ace king that floated on the flop because we went small. So our opponent does have a lot of strong hands. The other part of our opponent's range is the very weak stuff: 10-9. Pocket 10s, pocket jacks, pocket queens, right? A lot of that stuff, because we went small on the turn, we allowed that stuff to call and get carried to the river. So we have essentially a very, very strong hand here, pretty much going to be the nuts in this spot in a 3-bet pot. I know there's going to be some donkey that says,
Mark, 3-5 is the nuts.
If that's your first inclination, you're watching the wrong YouTube channel, I promise. Okay, so anyway, what I like to do, inverse question on this river. We've got a strong hand. We've got basically the nuts here with pocket kings, right? If I had a bluff here, what size would I go? Well, if we got to this river, say with a hand like 7-6 of diamonds, we got here with air, what size would I go to try to get my opponent to fold hands like ace 4, ace 9, ace king? It just wouldn't work. So if I had a bluff here, I'd probably be trying to just get the weak stuff to fold. Hands like 10s, jacks, 8-9 suited. suited, right? To get those hands to fold, I think we could just breathe on this pot. Maybe go 125, 150. So in the spot, the bluffs want to go small. So what does that mean when we have essentially the nuts here? We want to go huge. We want to put in all the money because our bluff does not feel comfortable going big. That means our value wants to go huge here. Okay, and let's say we do have 7-6 of diamonds here. Again, I would ask the inverse question. What would we want to do if we had value here? What would we want to do if we had a strong hand? We probably want to go huge here because our opponent has a lot of 2-pair in their range. Hands like ace-9, ace-4, ace-deuce, ace-king, right? We want to go huge when we have value here. So when we have a bluff, that probably means we want to default to small. We just want to get hands like 10s, jacks, queens, 9x. We just want to get that stuff to fold. So when we have a bluff here, maybe just 150, 125, something like that. Just trying to get all the very weak hands that are in our opponent's range that hate the ace on the river, that hated the king on the turn, to fold right here, right now. Okay, so far so good. We've talked about spots where our value wants to go small and our bluff's big, and where our value wants to go big and our bluff's small. Let me show you a couple spots maybe where our value wants to go very small or very big, and our bluffs want to go medium, right smack in the middle. All right, so we open ace-3 of spades. Our opponent's going to call in the big blind. We flop the nut flush draw. Look at that sweet baby there. We're gonna c-bet, our opponent calls, we go to the turn. Our opponent is capped, but they're going to be in elastic here. They're gonna have a lot of hands that just aren't folding no matter what size we go. So even though our opponent is capped, going to choose a big size on this turn. Our opponent is going to call. We go to the river. Look at that, we make top pair. So our opponent checks it over. So our opponent's range could be some very, very strong hands, maybe some ace jack, maybe occasionally some ace-9 suited that got a little bit sticky on the turn. And then a bunch of weak stuff, right? King high, queen high flush draws that bricked. Deuce X of spades or 4X of spades that bricked. King jack, queen jack, jack 10. That is our opponent's range. We have very, very thin value on this river. So I like to ask, if I was bluffing on this river, what size would I go? If we go big, we just run into a hand like ace jack or sometimes ace-9 suited. What if we bluff very, very small here if we have 7 high? Well, we could fold the king high, queen high flush draws, that's fine. But if our opponent has a hand like jack X, they're not folding if we bet 100 or 125 or something egregiously small on this river. So if we have a bluff, we don't really want to go tiny here because we're gonna get called by the jack X. We don't want to go huge because we're gonna get called by the 2-pair. But if we go right in the middle, find that size where jack X folds. And of course we get all the flush draws and straight draws to fold as well, which is really good when we have 7 high. So maybe our bluff in this spot wants to go something like half pot, 200. 250, something like that, and make sure all the jack X folds. So what does that mean when we have ace-3 of spades here? Maybe in the spot we can go slightly smaller and get all the jack X to call and get super, super thin value. One of the easy ways you can take advantage of live opponents is in equilibrium. The solver would almost never have a quarter pot size or a third pot size bet and open themselves up to getting check raised. But the thing is, in live poker, players just aren't going to take advantage of you going small. They're not going to raise thinly for value. They're not going to turn hands into bluffs. When you get check raised on the river after going raise pre-flop, bet, they're just going to have it. So what does that mean? You can go very, very small on this river, target the jack X, and if you ever do get check raised, you can just fold. But very, very nice spot to just go for thin value. And this would be one of the spots where our value wants to go either very, very small or very, very large, and the bluff wants to go kind of in between. And let's say we do have a hand like pocket 9s or pocket deuces getting to this river. Again, let's ask the inverse question. What would I do here if I was bluffing? Well, if I was bluffing here, I wouldn't want to go big because I wouldn't want to run into ace jack or ace deuce of spades or whatever. So I was bluffing, I'd choose the medium size if I got here with 10-8 of diamonds. So what does that mean when we have pocket 9s? The bluff doesn't want to go huge. So a very nice hand to just stick in all of the money here, figuring that our opponent is going to have quite a bit of ace jack, ace 4 of spades, ace deuce of spades. You may be thinking,
well, Mark, aren't we going to be exploitable if we just go huge with our very strong hands and small with our thin value?
No, we're not. But we're also not going to be doing that. Let me explain. Let's say we get to this river with a hand like ace jack with the ace of spades. Well, if we have that hand in the spot, going to be impossible for our opponent to have a hand like ace deuce of spades, ace 4 of spades, going to make it less likely that they have a hand like ace jack. So if we did get to this river with a hand like top 2, ace jack with the ace of spades, I may choose that very, very small size here, trying to get called by jack X in this spot, just because our opponent's going to have more weak jack X than they're going to have strong 2-pair hands. hands. We're not always just going big with the top of our range. It's going to depend upon what is our hand and what is our opponent's range and what are we trying to accomplish. All right, next let's look at a spot where our value wants to go medium, right in the middle, and maybe our bluffs want to go very, very small or very, very big. All right, so we got Kiglies. We are going to open on the button. Big blind calls. We are going to c-bet. Our opponent calls. We go to a turn. Our opponent is capped and inelastic. They're going to have a lot of queen X. They're going to have a lot of flush draws. They're going to have a lot of straight draws. They just aren't folding on this turn, so we're going to go big. Our opponent's going to check call. We go to a river, which is a 7. Now, what is our opponent's range getting to this river? They're going to have quite a bit of like top pair type hands, and they're going to have quite a bit of missed draws in this spot. The question I would ask here, we have kings. We got a pretty damn good hand in the spot. If we were bluffing here, what size would I bet to try to get my opponent to fold? Maybe going tiny is reasonable because we could get our opponent to fold their ace high flush draws or king high flush draws just by breathing on this pot. And then also maybe the other option, if we do have 9 high, is just jamming, is going all in. If we think the best hand our opponent has getting to this river is maybe a hand like ace queen occasionally, or maybe a hand like king queen, queen jack, something like that. If we think our opponent's not going to call 2x pot here, maybe the all-in size is pretty good as a bluff. So depending upon our opponent, if they're a real sticky, icky guy, they're just never going to fold ace queen, king queen in a million years. Maybe we choose a small size and we just get their brick draws to fold. If our opponent's more on the scared side, more conservative side, we think they can fold a queen X occasionally, and we just jam all in here. So our bluff either wants to go very tiny or very big in a spot because our opponent just never has 2 pair plus. So our value here would want to go somewhere in between. With the value, what is the biggest size we can go where a hand like queen jack or queen 10 never folds? The flush draw bricked, they may get more sticky with a queen here than if the board was king high and they had a king, right? So maybe something like pot, 400, maybe a little bit over pot, maybe something like 500 to get called by ace queen, king queen, queen jack, queen 10, something like that. The key is here, we probably wouldn't go all in with kings. And if we wouldn't go all in with kings, well, that really opens up the door when we're bluffing here to choose that all in size, right? So if we do have 8, 9 of diamonds, if we'd only go 500 with kings, well, maybe we just jam here to try to get all the queen X to fold. And if we get called by ace queen sometimes, that is okay. If we're getting the queen jack, queen 10, queen 9, we're getting all that stuff to fold, this bluff is going to print. Now, maybe we're just not all that dialed in on calibration. Maybe we don't know that player this well. They might overcall, they might overfold. We don't know. We don't have a lot of hours with this guy. Maybe the most profitable play is just choosing this small size, getting the ace high, king high, jack high flush draws to fold, and we don't really have to choose an egregious size to do that. Of course, we're gonna get snapped by the queen X, but we're getting a really, really nice price on our bluff here. And which bluff is going to be more profitable, the tiny one or the huge one, going to be quite player dependent. I can't answer that question, right? You're gonna have to pay attention in game. You're going to have to ask the right questions. You're gonna have to pay attention to showdowns, right? The nice thing here is on this river, we know the pocket kings probably wouldn't go all in. So we've got options when we're bluffing, right? We got options. We can go small, we can go huge. The value wants to go somewhere in between. All right, so we talked about when we have the lead, when we're trying to decide what to do with value, what to do when we're bluffing. But what about when we're facing a bet on the river? How do we decide then? So I'm gonna walk you through this very, very powerful and simple bluff catching checklist. But first, I wanna kind of start off with, where do fish bluff? And I think just kind of drilling this down is going to be extremely helpful. So in general, fish bluff a lot more when we look weak. What does that mean? When we check a street, when we just call, when we bet small, when we are not taking aggressive action, that's where their bluff frequency is going to be higher. When we're heads up, right? Multi-way, the pots are going to be massively, massively under bluff, but when we're in a heads up pot, that's where they may find some more bluffs. Smaller pots, right? When we're not in a 3-bet pot, when we're in a single raise pot, when there's a smaller bet size on the river, maybe earlier streets are more likely to bluff on the flop or the turn than they are on the river, right? When they have a wide range, right? So in a limped pot or in a single raise pot, button versus big blind or cutoff versus big blind, where they have a wider range, late position. When they have hands that just don't have showdown value, when they have brick draws, when they have natural bluffs, right? When they are wide, they're more likely to bluff. And finally, when they're losing or tilting. Some fish just never bluff when they're winning, but when they're losing or when they start tilting, you know, they start steaming, and that's where they start finding the bluffs. Some players, especially recreational players, are very, very emotional, and when they start getting emotional, that's when they start bluffing. All right, so next, let me show you this bluff catching checklist, and if you just force yourself to walk through this checklist, pause, take a deep breath, ask these questions before you decide on your river action when you are facing a bet on the river, I promise it's going to be like seeing the Matrix. And look, this concept is super powerful, and normally we save stuff like this for Basecamp. Basecamp, by the way, is 5 days of interactive coaching where we are just drilling pre-flop, in position, out of position. It is like taking off in a helicopter and seeing the entire forest of poker, where you're finally able to distance the forest from the trees, and you have a complete system so you can finally stop second guessing and you feel confident in every single spot. No matter what player you're against, what stack depth, what board type, it doesn't matter. You can come to a great decision in 3 questions or less because you have the entire system. And look, we give away quite a bit of sauce for free on this channel, in my very biased opinion. But inside Basecamp, that's where the real sauce is. We don't just give everything out on YouTube. No, the real sauce is behind the vault. It is in Basecamp. And if you are very, very serious about leveling up, if you are finally ready to stop second guessing, whether you're a pro trying to get to $100 an hour, whether you're a part-time player trying to buy your family an extra vacation, maybe where you fly first class, or maybe you don't even give a shit about the money, but you're just super, super competitive and you want to be the most feared, toughest player in your pool, no matter which type of those players you are. If you're playing more than 20 hours a month, if you're tracking results, if you are taking poker very, very seriously and you're not focused on tournaments or online play or anything like that. No, if that is you, Basecamp might be a fit, and that's where we give out all the sauce. All right, so the bluff catching checklist, here we go. The first question we want to ask is, do we beat value? Very simple question. Could our opponent be value betting worse, right? Number 2, are they capable, right? Is our opponent capable of bluffing in a spot? And the reason why I like to put these 2 questions first, do we beat value and are they capable? Well, if we don't beat value, if our opponent is only betting the nuts on the river, then we go to question number 2, are they capable of bluffing? And the question is no. If they're not betting worse for value and they're not capable of bluffing, we can just skip the rest of the questions that we're about to jump into, right? If we just can say, this guy's a super nit, he's never betting worse for value, he's never bluffing, well, it doesn't matter if we have the 3rd or 4th nuts in that spot, we just fold, right? We don't even have to go through the rest of the list. Next question, did we give them rope? Have we looked passive? Have we looked weak? Have we just check called, right? Have we, as the pre-flop raiser, maybe checked back a street? Did we give them rope? Is the size significant for the game? This one is really important because there's lots of players who are capable of bluffing for small sizes in small pots. But when the money gets big, when the money gets serious, say in a 2-5 game, someone puts in an $800 bet. Say in a 5-10 game, someone puts in $2K on the river. A lot of players just aren't capable of bluffing when the sizes get big and scary. So very important question to ask. Do they have non-showdown value? Basically, do they have natural bluffs that got to the spot? They have brick straight draws, brick flush draws. Do they have natural hands that would just want to fire in this spot? And finally, bonus question number 6, this one is gold. Is bluff raising more profitable than bluff catching? So we're going to talk about question number 6, but first let's go through these first 5 questions and I'll show you a couple practical examples of this bluff catching checklist in action. All right, so our opponent is going to open on the button. We're going to defend in the big blind with 8-5 of clubs. We flop middle pair. Our opponent goes small. We are going to call. Turn is a 3. We check it over. Our opponent goes small again, just 40 bucks here on this turn. So we put in the call once more with a lot of draws out there. Now the river's a 3 pairing the board. We check it over and our opponent goes 85 on this river. So bluff catching checklist here. Do we beat value? Well, no, our opponent's not betting worse for value here. Are they capable? Let's just assume in this spot we don't know them or they are capable so we can move on. Did we give them rope? Well, certainly. We called pre-flop, called on the flop, called on the turn. We've never made an aggressive action. We haven't put in a check raise. We haven't put in a big bet ourselves. We've certainly given them rope. Is the size significant? $85, 2-5 game. Probably not. This is small size, right? Finally, do they have non-showdown value? Sure. Jack 9, 9-7, Queen Jack, 5-6, 6-7, busted flush draws. So in this spot, even though we have a weak hand, the bluff catching checklist in the spot would lead me to conclude against quite a lot of players, we're gonna have the best hand here quite a bit, and I would flick in the call in this particular spot. All right, another bluff catching checklist in action. This one we're starting relatively deep. We got 1.5K. We're gonna open king, queen of diamonds. Button is going to call. Flop comes queen, 7-4. And as you guys know, I'm a big fan of checking quite a bit out of position because recreational players in general tend to overstab, telegraph their hand strength with their size, and they do not protect their check back range. So I'm checking quite a bit. I'm going to check. Our opponent is going to bet relatively small here, half pot. This board is relatively dry. maybe a little bit more static than dynamic, somewhere in between. Maybe in this spot, it is close between going for a check raise and calling. Would probably call here most of the time. But let's assume for the sake of this hand that we've had quite a few hours with this opponent and we've seen them stab big in spots like this where they have pocket 7s or pocket 4s and our opponent is quite sticky. We think if they did have a hand like queen 10 or queen jack or queen 9 suited or something like that they just never fold. So let's say for the sake of this hand that we do put in the big boy check raise and our opponent calls. We go to the turn, which is the ace of diamonds. We make the nut flush draw here on this turn, but our hand kind of downgraded now at this point. Probably not going to get value from hands like queen jack, queen 10, queen 9 suited anymore. So at this point, we're just going to check, and maybe on the river, we could go for some value if this turn goes check, check. We check, but our opponent does not check. He actually chooses a large size here, 300 into 537. Well, we've got second pair. We've got the nut flush draw, so we're going to call and see what transpires. Go to the river. We actually make 2 pair here. So we've got 2 pair. We're going to check it over, and now our opponent jams for 935 on this river. Let's go through the checklist. Do we beat value? The answer here is actually no, because we need to think about our opponent's range. And what is our opponent's range when they stab on the flop, then call a big check raise, then bet big on the turn? What hands would our opponent be betting for value here? Maybe a hand like ace queen makes a lot of sense. Hand like pocket 7s, pocket 4s, those make a lot of sense. And could our opponent have a hand like ace 7 or ace 4 here? Now, I would be maybe a little bit dubious that those hands would choose this all-in size on the river. Recreational players in general don't tend to use large sizes for thin value. They just get scared, even if it is illogical, of hands like aces, ace king, ace queen, stuff like that. What value hand would our opponent have that we beat here? Would they be doing this with a hand like 7-4? Well, if we don't think they're really choosing a size with ace 7 or ace 4, then no, probably not. We don't beat value. Are they capable? Well, in general, that's going to be player dependent, so can't answer that one. Let's just assume they are. Did we give them rope? No. We opened pre-flop. We check raised huge on the flop. An ace came on the turn, right? We did not give them rope. Sure, we checked on the turn, but after a huge check raise on the flop and then checking on the turn when an ace comes, right? Our opponents just aren't going to go crazy, right? We didn't really give them rope. We check raised. Is the size significant? $900+ in a 2-5 game? Yeah, it's significant. Do they have non-showdown value? Well, really, the only non-showdown value our opponent may have in this spot is specifically a hand like 5-6. So in this spot, even though we have a strong hand, to me in this situation, this is a relatively easy fold. You saw before where we had a hand like a second pair on the river, relatively easy call. This spot, we have 2 pair. We got a strong hand, relatively easy fold. So again, bluff catching, if we go through this checklist, isn't going to be about the strength of our own hand. It's going to be all about our opponent's range, right? What does our opponent have? And by using this bluff catching checklist, we can find spots to call with some weak hands and fold some strong hands, right? Because it's not about what we have, it's about what our opponents have. Finally, want to tie this all together and walk you through maybe some spots where we could consider bluff raising on the river, turning our bluff catcher into a bluff. And we're going to tie this back to the inverse question. It's all going to come together, wrapped up beautifully, neatly in a bow here. So let me show you. All right, so this one, the cutoff is going to open. Notice we start this hand very, very deep, 400 big blinds. We're going to 3-bet on the button with the second best hand in poker. Our opponent calls, we c-bet. Now our opponent check raises, and we could still be beating some value here. Our opponent could be doing this certainly with hands like 10s, jacks, queens, something like that. Our opponent could have some draws here as well. So we've got the overpair. We've got the backdoor nut flush draw. So we're going to call. We go to a turn, and on this turn, our opponent chooses a moderate size. And I think in this spot, could we still be beating value? Yeah, sure. We could still be beating queens or jacks or something like that here that may play this way some of the time. Our opponent could still have draws here, right? Some combo draws. It's like 6-7 of hearts or 8x of hearts, or maybe just like a king high flush draw or something like that, right? So I'm going to call once more in the spot on the turn. Now we go to the river, and now our opponent goes 300 into 947. So let's walk through this bluff catching checklist. Do we beat value? If our opponent did have a hand like jacks or queens, the heart has come in, they check raised on the flop in a 3-bet pot, they bomb the turn, and now the flush has come in on the river. Are they still betting a hand like jacks or queens in this spot, right? I would say probably not. Are they capable? Again, going to be player dependent, so we're going to skip this one for the sake of this video. Did we give them rope? Well, no. 3-bet pre-flop, and we c-bet on the flop. Every chance we've had, we've kind of taken the lead here until our opponent snatched it out of our hands from us. So no, we didn't really give them rope. Is the size significant? Probably not. I'd probably say not all that significant in this spot. Starting to get to the bigger side for a 2-5 game, but it's not a huge bet, so I would say no. Do they have non-showdown value? And this is the one here. This is a tough one. Their heart draws got there. A hand like 5-6 got there, right? They made it straight with 5-6. Their sets, they still have all the sets, right? They still have pocket 8s, pocket 4s, pocket deuces. They still have all those hands. They may even have pocket 10s that would play this way some of the time, right? 10s, check raises on the flop on this kind of wet dynamic board when we go small, continues on the turn for protection, then makes a set on the river and goes small, trying to get called by an overpair. They may have 10s, they may have 8s, they may have 4s, they may have deuces, right? But where's the non-showdown value hands? Very, very hard for them to be bluffing. So what is their range here? And this is the important question, because let's zoom out. And if they did have a hand like King, Queen of Hearts or something like that, is this the way they would play? Would King, Queen of Hearts always check raise on the flop? No, probably not. Players in 3-bet pots especially are going to play their draws more passively. So maybe King, Queen of Hearts would check raise some of the time. But the type of player who's going to play King, Queen of Hearts or 6-5 of Hearts or something like that aggressively on the flop and turn in a 3-bet pot, is this the size that they would choose on the river? Or do they get a little bit more greedy when they finally bink their flush on the river? And I would say with very high conviction here that if a player is going to be aggressive enough to check raise a flush draw in a 3-bet pot against someone who looks like they have a strong hand, they're going to size up here. So when they choose a size, it's just not going to be a whole hell of a lot of flushes. So what is this going to be? Well, it's not going to be a bluff. It's not going to be a lot of flushes. It's probably just going to be a value hand that is worse than a flush. Pocket 8s, pocket 4s, pocket deuces, ace 5, 5-6. It's going to be quite a lot of sets. Not many bluffs, not many flushes. Let's go back to our bluff catching checklist. We don't beat value. We don't know if they're capable. We didn't give them rope. The size is somewhere in between. They don't have showdown value. So in this spot, folding would certainly be more profitable than calling, just because the bluff catching checklist is telling us to fold. But haha, we forgot. There's one more question on the bluff catching checklist, and that question is bluff raising more profitable? Aha. If we did have a hand like Ace King of Hearts, what size would we raise to try to get a hand like pocket 4s or pocket 8s to call? The question is, would we go all in here if we had a hand like Ace King of Hearts? And again, going to be very player dependent. So before you say,
Mark, in my game, they would never.
I don't care. The point is that we ask the question. This is not about calibrating. Maybe in your game they always call or they always fold. I don't care. It doesn't matter. The point is that we ask the question. And if we think on this river, you know what? If we had Ace King of Hearts here, I don't know if I'd go all in, because the obvious draw got there. It's very hard for us to be bluffing. I think my opponent may fold a hand like pocket 8s here if we go all in. So therefore, with aces here, well, we can just put the money in and get our opponent to fold almost everything in the spot. If we are against a player and they're just never folding a set in a million years, well, we know exactly what to do when we have Ace King of Hearts in. We just put all the money in, and when we have pocket aces, then we just fold. So you see, if we get to this river with Ace King of Hearts, we'd ask the same question. Well, what would I do in this spot if I was bluffing? If I was bluffing in this spot, I think a lot of reasonable players here may fold a hand like 8s, 4s, deuces, pocket 10s. I think reasonable players may fold. So that means with Ace King of Hearts, we don't want to go all in, right? We want to choose a smaller size, whether it's 800, 900, even 1,000, something like that. We want our opponent to call with their sets. So therefore, with Ace King, we would want to choose this smaller size. All right, let's look at one more example, and this one is a doozy. So our opponent opens, we're gonna defend, we flop a gutter, our opponent c-bets, we're gonna call, we turn top pair, our opponent double barrels, no real reason to raise here, we're just gonna call once again. River is an ace, and now our opponent triple barrels on this river, so bluff catching checklist. Do we beat value? Well, no, certainly not. We got second pair, our opponent isn't betting worse for value. Are they capable? Don't know. You're gonna have to decide that. Did we give them rope? Yes, we went check, call, check, call, check. Is the size significant for the game? Nah, probably not. You know, 120, 2-5 game, smaller size. Do they have non-showdown value? Certainly they do in this spot. A lot of players are just c-betting the range here. It's a wide versus wide spot, button versus big blind. They're gonna have a lot of hands that just don't really have much going on here. Maybe a hand like 5-7, maybe a hand like Queen Jack that c-bet the flop and picked up equity. Maybe a hand like King Jack or Jack 8 that c-bet the flop and then picked up equity, right? They do have some non-showdown value. And finally, I would ask, is bluff raising more profitable? First, we have to determine what is our opponent's range. Well, I think our opponent's range is quite polarized. It's not going to be hands like pocket jacks or pocket queens or 10x betting for value here, right? It may not even be a weak ace x, like a hand like ace 3 or ace 4 or something like that. That hand may just check back. Their range on this river, when they're betting this size, is going to be maybe like strong ace x plus, maybe ace 10 or ace 9 for 2 pair, 6x for trips, or hands like 7-8 for straights. When they're betting on this river, they're saying, I have ace queen plus, or basically I have nothing. It's not going to be a lot of in-between hands. So our opponent's range is polarized. And when our opponent's range is polarized, we don't really want to do a lot of bluff raising, particularly when we have showdown value. Because when we have a hand like second pair here, raising isn't really going to accomplish much, right? Our opponent's range is super strong. They have a lot of trips, straights, top 2 pair, boats even, right? And this would be a situation where I'd be calling quite a bit, because the bluff catching checklist showed us our opponent could have quite a few bluffs in this spot. We walked down that road, right? So I'd be calling falling quite a bit. But here's the sauce here. If we did have a hand like 7-5 of clubs that got to this spot, makes sense, right? We float the flop, pick up a combo draw on the turn, so we call again. When our opponent is polarized, what would we do with the inverse? If we got here with a super strong hand, like pocket 9s or pocket 6s or something like that, right? What would we do here with the inverse? Well, if we had 9s in this spot, I'm not sure our opponent's ever folding a hand like a straight, like 7-8. Even a hand like 6-7 or king 6, I'm not sure our opponent is ever folding that hand. So if we had 9s here, we probably just want to jam and just get real greedy and go for value. So when we have 7 high here, a play we may want to make, since our value wants to go all in, maybe we just click. And we could get queen jack, king jack, jack 8. We could get all of that stuff to fold here because our value wants to go all in when our opponent is super polarized. So maybe our bluff just wants to click. Because when we do have a hand like pocket 9s here on this river, again, we probably just want to go all in. So a quick shortcut for you guys. When our opponent is betting linear, when they are betting thinly on rivers in general, when we're bluff raising, our bluffs want to go absolutely huge. And our value wants to choose more of a moderate small sizing because our opponents have a lot of thin value in their range. But when our opponents are betting polarized, like this example, where they have a lot of strong hands, like boats, like straights, like trips, or they have a bunch of air, when our opponent is super polarized, our bluffs want to click because we can fold out all of the better bluffs. And same spot with value, when our opponent is polarized, well, then our value wants to just jam. If our opponent has a bluff, they're folding either way. And if they have value, when they have a polar range, they have a lot of super strong hands. So our value wants to go all in. So again, whether we have the lead when we're deciding what to do with value and bluffs, or we're bluff catching and we're deciding whether to call, fold, or turn our hand into a bluff raise, it's not always about big with bluffs, small with value. No, and if that's what you think this is, you just don't get it. We've walked through a bunch of examples, some where our bluffs want to go huge, some where our value wants to go huge, and some where our bluffs and value want to go somewhere in the middle. If this video kind of feels like seeing the Matrix and like your eyes are opening and you're seeing all the possibilities of poker and stuff is finally starting to make sense, again, that's what our Basecamp is for. And a lot of strong players, to be clear, can become crushers, can get to $100+ an hour on their own, but Basecamp just speeds up the process. If you want to get there faster, that's what Basecamp is for. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video and it turns you into the biggest boy possible. Thank you and have a gentle